All right, let's talk about something that is a massive headache for pretty much anyone in talent acquisition. How do we actually know what our recruiters can handle? For way too long, we've been stuck on this simple and honestly pretty flawed idea of just counting recs per recruiter. It's time for a much smarter, more realistic model.
You know this moment, right? We've all been there. You're in that big planning meeting, the pressure's on, everyone's looking at you to predict next year's hiring needs, and you fall back on that same old, easy calculation. It feels safe, it feels familiar, but as we're about to see, it's probably hiding the real story of what your team is up against. And this gets right to the heart of the problem. You see, the traditional model, it's built on this really shaky assumption that recruiting is basically a factory assembly line, that every single unit, in our case, every single job requisition, is exactly the same. But come on, anyone who's ever hired for more than one role knows that's just not true. Not even close. This old formula, it's dangerously simple. Why? Because it treats all work as being totally equal. It kind of suggests that filling, say, a junior admin role takes the exact same blood, sweat, and tears as headhunting a super niche senior data scientist. In the real world, this approach just completely ignores all the complexity and nuance that defines a recruiter's actual day. So how do we fix this? Well, the first big step is to bring in a whole new way of thinking. We need to start weighting the work. It's a simple idea, but it's really powerful. Since not all roles are created equal, we shouldn't count them as if they are. So the basic idea here is to give each role a complexity weight. A simple high-volume position might get a weight of, say, 0.5, but a super specialized executive role, that could be a 3.5. Now, this already gives you a much more accurate picture, but there's an even more elegant way to do this. And this leads us to a really powerful insight. Instead of trying to subjectively guess the weight of a role, what if we used a hard number we already have? It turns out that the total compensation value a recruiter is managing might just be the single best predictor of their actual capacity. Okay, so look at this comparison. It really frames the problem perfectly. In the old world, recruiter A with 20 recs looks like they're working 4 times harder than recruiter B. But does that feel right to you? I mean, we all know those higher-paying senior roles demand way more research, really complex stakeholder management. The stakes are just so much higher. And here it is. This is the aha moment. It turns out both recruiters are managing the exact same total annual compensation, £600,000. This strongly suggests that their overall workload, the value they are responsible for delivering, is way more similar than that simple rec count would ever have you believe. So this all leads us to a really practical new rule of thumb. A fully ramped up, effective recruiter can probably manage somewhere between £1 and £1.5 million in total salary for their open roles. And what's so cool about this is that it kind of self-corrects. For roles around, say, 75K, that works out to about 15, 20 recs. For those big executive roles at 200K, it naturally dials it back down to about 5-7. See? It just works. Okay, so we've figured out how to account for the complexity of the roles. But what about all this stuff that's completely outside of a recruiter's control? Right, the next layer of our model has to deal with the realities of the market. And there are 3 huge external forces we've got to think about. First, just basic supply and demand. Are you trying to find a common fish in a stocked pond or a rare bird in a desert? Second, salary. Are you paying competitively? Are you asking your recruiters to go into battle with one hand tied behind their backs? And finally, your employer brand. Is it a magnet that pulls people in? Or is it something your team has to constantly overcome? And believe me, the impact is tangible. Let's say you have a weak employer brand and your pay is below market rate. Your recruiters might only be able to operate at, say, 75% of their baseline capacity. That's a massive hit to their productivity that has absolutely nothing to do with their skill or their effort. Now we get to maybe the most important variable of all, the recruiter themselves. It's time to connect the work they do directly to the value they create for the business. And to do that, we need to think about leverage. The recruiter leverage ratio is an incredibly powerful metric that basically calculates a clear ROI. You just take the total compensation value a recruiter is managing and you divide it by their own fully loaded cost. We're talking salary, benefits, tools, the whole shebang. Now, it's really important to understand that a lower ratio isn't necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, a high-volume recruiter might hit a 19-to-1 ratio, and that looks amazing on paper. But an executive recruiter who's at 8-to-1? That is perfectly fine, maybe even great, because it reflects the intense, high-touch, critical work that's needed for those multi-million-pound hires. This is such a critical piece of the puzzle. Most capacity models make a huge mistake. They treat every recruiter like an identical, fully productive robot from day one. But we know that's not how it works. A recruiter in their first month is fundamentally different from one who's been with you for 2 years. The reality is that ramping up is a journey. In those first 3 months, a new recruiter is probably operating at less than half of what they'll eventually be able to do. It often takes a full year, maybe even more, for them to get fully productive as they build relationships, learn your systems, and really get that critical market knowledge.
And look at the difference this makes when you look at a whole team. On paper, a team of 5 might have a theoretical capacity of over 6 million pounds. But when you factor in where each person actually is on their ramp-up journey, the realistic capacity is nearly 2 million pounds less. That gap, that's where teams get completely burned out, and it shows you the massive, massive hidden cost of recruiter turnover.
Okay, so we've taken apart all the different pieces, right? We've got the role complexity, the market forces, and the recruiter variable. Now let's put it all back together into a modern, actionable model that you can actually start using.
So where do you start? Well, here's a 4-step game plan. First, establish your baseline. What is the total compensation value your team is managing right now? Second, be brutally honest about your position in the market. Third, do an audit of your automation. What's helping, what's not, and finally, you've got to calibrate. Test your new model against your past performance until it accurately reflects what really happened.
And while you're building this new model, please keep an eye out for these warning signs. These are the symptoms that pop up long before the old metrics even start to blink. If your time to fill is creeping up or your offer acceptance rates are taking a dive, your team is probably over capacity, even if their rec count looks totally fine on a spreadsheet. And this really is what it all boils down to. We have to completely shift our thinking. The goal isn't just to maximize the number of jobs a recruiter can juggle. The goal is to optimize for quality, for a great candidate experience, and for making hires that actually stick around and add real value. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. Forget the numbers for just a second and really consider what success looks like. What does handling a requisition well truly mean for your candidates, for your hiring managers, and for your entire business? Because answering that, that's the first step to building a truly incredible talent acquisition function.